Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of Fearless Journeys Thriving in College. I'm Steve, and with me is my wonderful co-host, Corinne.
Thank you, Steve. We have an especially important episode today, one that touches upon a sensitive but crucial topic: suicide prevention, education, and life promotion in Canadian colleges.
Absolutely. It's a topic that often does not get the attention it deserves. We're here to shed some light on myths surrounding suicide and really to discuss its prevalence among college students in Canada. And today we have an amazing guest joining us today.
Yeah, our expert today is John Thompson, a renowned mental health expert with years of experience in suicide prevention and mental health education. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you both for having me. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for stepping up and having a conversation like this about a topic that's often heavily stigmatized.
Yeah, and we really appreciate that you're here. Tell us, Corinne said, years of experience. So what does that little bio sound like?
Well, as you know, my name is John Thompson. I'm the supervisor of outreach and education at Lethbridge Family Services. And a part of that role is suicide intervention training for helping professionals, but also other versions of discussions and programming and presentations around topics like mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And I've been in this role now for more than 20 years, but I've been connected in some creative way or other, including a volunteer and then a board member and then a paid employee in suicide prevention since 1989. How about that?
That's pretty good. Long time, for sure. We appreciate your expertise here, too. Corinne?
So just a quick reminder to our listeners, if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a mental health professional or helpline. One in particular is Talk Suicide. You can look up that number online. You're not alone in this journey. So also a note, we are going to be using language that may be uncomfortable to hear just because it is the most accurate way to talk about suicide, again, to help reduce that stigma and to talk as openly as possible.
Okay, and before we dive into our conversation with John, let's talk about some of those common myths surrounding suicide. And of course, there's a lot, but Corinne, would you like to start?
Of course. One myth is talking about suicide with someone who is struggling may put the idea in their head. In reality, discussing it openly can provide an opportunity for them to share their feelings and seek help.
Yeah, absolutely. And another myth is that people who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. And in many cases, these individuals are really genuinely struggling, and we should take their words very seriously.
And don't forget the myth that asking someone directly if they are thinking about suicide can make it worse. In fact, asking can be a lifeline. It shows the person that we are willing to listen to what they're saying and willing to hear maybe some difficult emotions and some difficult experiences.
Yeah, it really gives them that hope sometimes that they need. Now let's turn our attention to the prevalence of suicide in college students. John, can you share some insights on this issue?
So it can be difficult to find up-to-date Canadian statistics that are specific to the college environment. So if you were to Google it, for example, or even to look at some really well-vetted websites, you might be able to find some information, but what you'll tend to find more often is statistics that relate to college-age people. So for instance, in between 2020 and 2021, suicide was the second leading cause of death for Canadians between the ages of 15 and 34, which I would suggest captures most of the college-age individuals.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so there's that part. Again, some post-secondary institutions have had individualized experiences with suicides of students, and you would also see that out there too if you were to check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is a high rate for this population.
Yeah, I mean, and I would suggest, now the stats that I have in front of me don't say that, but I would suggest second only to car accidents in terms of cause of death in that age cohort. And that's pretty consistent, and it's been somewhere between the second and fourth leading cause of death for that same cohort since at least 2016.
Wow, that's a long time. Yeah. What about some of those factors that maybe students are facing that may contribute to feelings of suicide?
Well, I think when in our suicide intervention training, for instance, we talk about things that might contribute to somebody reaching a point where they consider ending their life. And we talk about them really we think of them as two separate categories, but the separation really is done by us for discussion purposes. So we think of the two major themes as loss and change beyond a person's control. But if we were to think about loss, we can think about that in kind of three different ways. You can think about loss of people and pets, for instance, and that's not only through bereavement, someone dying or a pet dying. It could be loss through separation or moving, or even someone going away to school, which on the face of it is a very positive change and one that a person needs to some degree, needs to author for themselves, but it doesn't mean that it isn't difficult or profound. So one part of loss is people and pets. Another part would be material losses of houses, cars, money, jobs, things like that. And I don't say it that way to minimize the experience of losing those things, but only to differentiate it from losing people and pets. And then the third version of loss to consider is what we would think of as intrinsic losses or personal losses that somebody might experience. So things like a loss of hope, a loss of optimism, a loss of belief in oneself or confidence or efficacy, agency, something like that. And then, of course, change, particularly change beyond a person's control, is the variable other than loss, right? So you can already tell, and I'm sure the listeners can too, that the differentiation of those two things is a bit artificial. Because when we experience a loss, often there is change associated with that we can't control. And the reverse is also true.
Yeah, for sure. And Corinne, I think when we deal with students here at the college, we see things very much like that. So if we're thinking things like social isolation, that's a big loss for students, right?
Yeah, not having that friend group that maybe they had prior to coming to college. Yeah, moving away from home, all those things.
I wonder if you might see things too that would be, as far as change goes, that maybe college doesn't meet the expectation that the person had. And so that's not a loss in the same way as losing people or pets or material losses, but it is one of those intrinsic kind of ones. If we had, for lack of a better description, if we had high expectations or expectations of any sort that weren't met, the felt sense of that can often be a loss.
Yeah, those academic pressures where you come into college and you think that, I was an A student in high school and then all of a sudden I'm not. And I've created that vision in myself of what good student looks like, and I don't make that grade, then we tend to think, more negative thoughts.
And we internalize that stuff. And we oftentimes we can use that to further injure ourselves. And to your point, Corinne, if we're, losing those connections as well, or we haven't formed them yet, we maybe are walking around with that felt sense alone.
Yeah.
Okay, John, so what are some of the warning signs or red flags that we should be aware of?
So I think if I could say it this way, the most of what you'd be looking for or asking about is a change from baseline for that person. So resisting using the word normal, but knowing what is baseline for that person and recognizing change from that. Now that can be hard for those of you in the helping roles, for instance, because you might not have an ongoing relationship with somebody, with a student who comes for support. But perhaps some of their friends, the people they are connected to, might notice changes from what's usual for that person. Otherwise, it's okay to ask. If a friend, for instance, is saying to one of their classmates that they're not sleeping well, for a friend to say, "Is that the usual for you? When did that start? Is that different?" So recognizing a difference from what's baseline for them is kind of an overarching theme, but then you can look at things like, not doing things that they used to do. So they have pulled back further from social contacts than they were. Maybe they're giving away prized possessions. Maybe their self-talk is so profoundly negative, it starts to leak out. Remember a minute ago when we were talking about carrying around the felt sense of these losses or perceived failures alone, sometimes that stuff, it kind of gets stuck on repeat, so much so that it leaks out. So you might hear things like, I'm not as good as I thought I was, or I knew I wouldn't be able to make it, or those kinds of things. And then the other things, maybe there's an increase in risky behavior.
Right.
So things like increased use of alcohol and other drugs. And we know that for some folks, maybe it's their first time away from home, and maybe there's some experimentation with those things that isn't about feeling overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. But if it's accompanied with apathy, if the overuse of alcohol and drugs or other risk-taking behaviors, I think about, getting a bunch of speeding tickets, for instance, and things like that, and the person is expressing that they don't care one way or the other, that to me is a marker too, those changes with apathy.
Yeah, and like you said, off that baseline. But what if we have a student comes in from out of town, and they haven't made those connections yet? What do you think might be something observable if we don't know what that baseline is? I mean, you mentioned some of that leaking out dialogue for sure. Mm-hmm. What if there's very little? What do you think would we see the best or the most?
Well, I think, if they were sitting in front of you, if we were to think about things like low or no or inconsistent affect, as they say, so that a person maybe is expressing things that are, using words to describe a powerful emotional experience, but you can't see it in their face. You can't hear it in their tone of voice. And perhaps the person is kind of cocooning a little bit if they're face-to-face. So they're taking up as little room as physically possible.
Right.
They're not making eye contact as appropriate, keeping in mind that there are cultural differences there as well. But lots of crying, lots of sighing, shaking, and they look really tired. Oftentimes, people who are going through what Edwin Schneidman called a psych ache, so they're experiencing intolerable psychological pain, it affects the way you meet the world. It affects whether or not you sleep the same as you did, whether or not you eat the same as you did, and your body will show that to the world in some way. And maybe they're not taking care of themselves in the way that they normally would. And some of that may take some rapport and some trust to be able to ask about, is this the same or different?
I think one thing that I like to use when I see something different is often I say, I've noticed that you're looking different or you're acting different. And I think that brings out a conversation a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I like the invitations of things like that, like, help me understand what this is like for you. That's different than me sort of, looking at somebody and telling them what I think is happening for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. John, what are some strategies students can use to cope with emotional changes around suicidal thoughts and struggles?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I think there are a lot of things that So I'm trying to keep it so that we can talk about things in a really practical way instead of only in the way of, well, in a perfect world, you walk into wellness services, you get an appointment that day, and then you get one every week forever. So instead, I would say, as far as strategies, to use the word that you did, help seeking generally.
Right.
You know, to recognize that the strength in help seeking is the demonstration of, I recognize when the size of these feelings and the intrusiveness of these thoughts gets too big for me to handle on my own. So help seeking can look different in different ways. It might mean connecting to the wellness team here, and I would suggest for folks who maybe are here from out of town and maybe don't know where to start off campus, let's say, or maybe they don't have a lot of informal contacts, starting with the wellness team would be a great thing. Again, in a really low pressure kind of way to try to connect. But there are other things that they could do too, like online resources. So for instance, Lethbridge is a part of Help Seeker. So Help Seeker is a website, but also an app. They could check that out. And essentially, if you think Google Map in a way, you go on to Help Seeker, you tell it that you're in Lethbridge, and you can search by topic, and you kind of hit the go button, and it comes up with a Google Map with pins in it. So if you were to search something like recovery in Lethbridge, all the recovery-related services would come up on a map for you, and the pins will tell you not just where it is, but how to access it, whether there's a fee, what the phone number is, that sort of stuff. So it might be ones like that. Now, there are limitations to that because services, in order to be included, need to maintain their own information on there.
Right.
And there might be students at the college who don't have ready, easy access to electronics all the time.
Yeah, there are quite a lot, actually.
And so that would be a barrier as well. But the distress line of Southwestern Alberta is available 24 hours a day. It's confidential and anonymous, and sometimes, especially for someone who may be having a really hard time, especially at night, especially in the middle of the night, to know that there are 24-hour options out there can be really, really helpful too.
And I think, Bryn, you know a couple national ones as well, right?
The Talk Suicide phone number, yeah.
Yeah, and excitingly, coming in November,
which may already be live when this is aired.
Is 988. So a national 3-digit number. It's been running in the United States for a little while to pretty good success, but a 3-digit number that will help people not have to remember a great big long 1-800 number, for instance. And with the idea of connecting them to local resources to them.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. What about things like, building connections?
Oh, before we go there, can I talk about one more resource, and that is Hope for Wellness?
Oh, please, yeah.
Yes.
So and I know that was one that was a part of our sort of pre-discussion. So Hope for Wellness offering, again, support aimed at supporting Indigenous folks, and that service is offered in a number of Indigenous languages as well, and that a caller could request to connect with an elder through that service too. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that's out there. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, no, that's great. and I think sometimes we don't take the perspective of our Indigenous culture in Canada because we look at in our Indigenous cultures more of life promotion instead of suicide intervention or prevention. It's more life promotion.
Yeah, true. And there are some provincial programs aimed at that, and trainings available through AHS as well that that people could consider if they want to. And maybe we can talk about those things a little bit as we go. I mean, we offer suicide intervention training for people who will be working with at-risk populations, and we could talk about what that might look like if there are students who could benefit from that. But we also have the Community Helpers program, which is more about supporting peers, and the training is aimed at that. You know, I can mention those a little bit in more detail a little bit later if you like. But yeah, and to recognize that even the Kids Help Phone, most people don't realize that Kids Help Phone is available to people up to the age of 24.
Wow, yeah.
Now, if you were to say to somebody, even, I know, Corinne, you've had this opportunity as well, to even say to somebody in grade 9 that Kids Help Phone is available, they kind of shrug and go, I'm not a kid, I'm in grade 9.
Right.
But Kids Help Phone does have, and their website, kidshelpphone.ca, has a lot of really good, vetted, usable, researched resources, and is also available as a 24-hour thing. And if you can't remember the phone number, go buy a coffee crisp or a box of Smarties.
Yeah.
Also with Kids Help Phone, I believe you can request an Indigenous person if you identify as Indigenous. They don't have that service available all the time, but they are working on that as well. So that's cool too.
Yeah, and even if you don't want to chat or call them voice to voice, the website, as I said, a lot of really good, vetted, well-researched stuff. And we know that there are things available on the internet that aren't helpful, caring, and supportive like that, and maybe wouldn't be vetted in the same kind of way. Or maybe even if they're vetted, they're not as user-friendly. So 2 of the most user-friendly online resources that I know of, one is the Kids Help Phone.
Right.
Love that. Check it out. And the other one is suicideinfo.ca.
Yeah, they have a good information there.
And that's the Center for Suicide Prevention out of Calgary. And it's the largest English language suicide prevention library in the world.
Wow.
And actually, one thing about working in suicide prevention for a long time is I've kind of come to be a bit of a historian of it.
Right.
And Lethbridge has a connection to the origin story of the Center for Suicide Prevention, of assist training and other things because of its own community response to suicide prevention going back to the early 1980s.
Yeah, that's good. And I think sometimes, as talking about resources, we oftentimes, if we're interacting with somebody who's thinking about suicide, we can actually use those resources to get some help and information for ourselves so that we can help better.
Absolutely. And the Center for Suicide Prevention, for instance, if you were to just Google suicideinfo.ca, you can go on there and search through all of their resources, or if you can't easily find what you're looking for, there's a button on most of the screens that you'll come across on that site that says Ask a Librarian. And they are real people and they do answer. So if you're not finding what you're looking for, if you're looking for specific things around suicidality or how to support somebody who might be suicidal and you can't find it easily, ask the librarian. They'll not only find it for you, they'll likely send it to you, an electronic version of it to you in an email.
Yeah, that's great. And, even in the midst of helping somebody, you can just even phone somebody and say, hey, I need help. I've got somebody here.
And I would also say that that's true for the distress line of Southwestern Alberta too. So if you're concerned about a friend, if you're supporting somebody, or you got a roommate and you're a little worried about your roommate, but you're really not sure what to do, and this podcast is a really good start, but it's not a substitute for being able to talk at length with somebody about what you're seeing in a friend. But you could certainly do that by calling the distress line of Southwestern Alberta and say, I have a friend and I'm really concerned about them. Now, you should know that they are also going to respond to you as the caller. They're going to make sure that you're okay. But suicide prevention is not a secret.
Right.
How to support somebody, how to act in a way that's helpful, caring, and supportive to somebody isn't a secret, and the information to do that better ought not to be a secret too.
Yeah, definitely. One thing, going back to some of those strategies, those of us who talk about suicide a lot, we know that when somebody's thinking about suicide, their vision is quite focused, right? And they start to pull away from everybody. So how would maybe some strategies around making connections be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. It's often referred to really in a kind of a tunnel vision sort of way, that if you think about it, again, that intolerable psychological pain limits our availability to our ability to see the resources that might be around us that are helpful, caring, and supportive, because the pain becomes the focus. So one of the things that we can do is just being open and being able to say, I notice that you don't seem quite yourself, to the point you made earlier. I notice you're not quite yourself, but I want you to know that I'm here if you need to talk. And hey, is it okay with you if I just check in with you every couple days? And, if it feels like things are getting worse, let me know. And, maybe there can be a time when you can bump into the person and say, you know what, I was thinking about the last time we chatted. And I'm still really worried about you. And you know what? I went to wellness here on campus, and I was just checking in to see what was available. And I had a conversation with somebody there. And if you want to go to wellness, I'll go with you, if you want me to. And I think that can really help the person feel less alone. And what that can do is invite opportunities for them to rehearse help seeking, to rehearse advocating for themselves. And that's a really good thing. To your point, when we think about prevention versus life promotion, sometimes those are seen as opposites, but really the reality is we get really good at what we practice and what we focus on. And so if we can support somebody in focusing on help seeking, on asking for support, because we know that in certain populations, that's very low, and for instance, in male-born Canadian youth, 50% of male-born Canadian youth with a psych ache, something profound happening for them emotionally and psychologically, 50% of them tell no one ever. Mm-hmm. And about 35% of female-born Canadian youth, same thing. They don't tell anyone. And of the people they do tell, overwhelmingly, it's people they're connected to socially. It's their friends. Overwhelmingly. Now, it's not to say they won't seek help from a professional, but that's not usually first. It's usually the people already connected to them socially who they go to first.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think, Corinne, we see that too in the students that we see. Mm-hmm. I would even venture to say that 95% of students that we see have some kind of psych ache or have experienced it. Mm-hmm. So we know that it's really prevalent, right? I think it's rare that somebody doesn't really have a very psych ache, as you say. Mm-hmm. And Corinne, when we talk about some strategies, I know you're really big on self-care. Mm-hmm. You love the self-care part, right?
Yeah.
And so for those students, and we talk about, John, you talked about seeking help, right? And so Corinne, and seeking help in self-care, what would that look like?
It could be like looking at what we're doing for ourselves. So are there things that we enjoy doing? And like that can be self-care. That can also be that hope piece, which we know like hope and connection can be things that can prevent or reduce the likelihood of someone thinking about suicide or actually killing themselves. So finding those ways that we can have that connection and have that hope. So finding those activities that we can be successful at, that we enjoy doing, that we have that something to look forward to, that hope piece. Also thinking like when we're really, really stressed and we're not eating well or we're not sleeping well, that makes it worse. If we are struggling with a psych ache, same thing. If we're not eating well, if we're not sleeping well, that can make those emotions, that experience, that much more intense. So I know it's easier to say than to do, but where we can, finding those ways to get better rest, to fuel our bodies with the food that we're eating. Yeah. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I like that a lot. I think when we talk about resources, which really we're talking about when we talk about the wellness team, when we're talking about friends, we're talking about external resources, and we're talking about them sort of both the long-term and short-term resources. So long-term resources generally are resources that are, for lack of a better description, like purpose specific. So a short-term resource could be a doctor because they're in your life because of doctoring, right?
Right.
Or it could be even a counselor, could be a short-term resource. So they're in your life to offer support in a specific kind of tailored way. Whereas friends, family, those are often in your life by choice, by your choice. If they're a resource for you, it's because you see them and feel them as helpful, caring, and supportive to you. But to your point, both of you, when you think about self-care, we're really talking about internal resources. We're talking about the things inside of us that can help us remember to be helpful, caring, supportive to ourselves, to be kind to our own pain. And that's not like reveling in it, but to acknowledge it and to be kind, and that might mean taking the steps that we need to look at some relaxation things, some mindful things, exercise, right? We know that exercise impacts mood and in a positive way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know the numbers, but I know there's science behind the fact that it reduces anxiety and depression.
Absolutely. And I can't quote you the study, but I can tell you the statement that I've heard about it is that mild depression is affected to a similar degree by those self-care activities, exercise and diet and those kinds of things, as mild medications. Now, that's not saying that one is a substitute for the other,
right?
And that they sometimes need to co-occur. And I think, that's not, it's not about judgment of folks that need support from medications, right, to respond in an effective way to what's happening. And that's also help seeking. And sometimes we don't think of self-care, like most of us, I think if you had a group of like 50 people and we're going to make it a giant list of awesome self-care things, I'd be surprised if anyone wrote going to the doctor on the list. But it really is.
Yeah. All the years that I've been asking that question, I've never heard that. So
yeah, and yet it really is. And so is going to talk to a counselor or a peer support person, or to get some psychoeducation and support around things that are important to you. Those things are as much self-care as other things. And sometimes it might be a little easier for folks to think about what would it be like if it were someone else. So if you imagined that it wasn't you going through the things that you're going through, imagine, though, it was your best friend or a sibling that you were strongly connected to, or a parent figure that you were strongly connected to, or an aunt or an uncle, cousin, somebody that matters. Imagine that it was them going through it, and imagine what you might say to them. Probably the things you would say sound like, "Are you okay? How can I help? I'm here for you." Now, are those the things that we say to ourselves when we're struggling? Sometimes they're not. And if they're not, this isn't another chance for us to judge ourselves harshly for our self-talk, but rather to reflect on if that's what I would do for a friend, if I would help them respond with kindness to their own pain and support them in seeking help for it, maybe I can do that for me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, again, one of the nice things, if I can say a nice thing, that we can encourage people is to look at the different aspect, look at the different side. You mentioned a lot about helping others, and I think it's really big, Corinne, if we look at where the best help is, and there's a couple things. One, peer support is huge. You'll get more buy-in. Can you call it buy-in, I guess?
Sure.
Yeah, from peers, right? And the other part is that who's that support person? So oftentimes people who are thinking about dying by suicide, they, like you said, they have that tunnel vision, that focus, that narrow focus. But if we ask them, who's your biggest supporter? Who supports you the most? It oftentimes brings them back to that. And they could very well be peers.
Yeah, and I suppose my and I don't even know if caution is the right word, but I think it's worth mentioning that you can have a really well-meaning friend. Some of us already know where the sentence is going, right? I might have well-meaning friends in my life who don't have the capacity or the knowledge to support me as effectively as I need to.
Right.
So that's not about judging the friends, but recognizing the limitations sometimes of them. And I would also say the other part is true, that if you are the helpful, caring, supportive friend to someone who's in a crisis, recognize that that takes energy from you.
Yeah, a lot of energy.
And it's hard, and there's a cost to caring for your friends as well as you do. So remember that every good helper needs a good helper. And to say to your friend, call me whenever you need to, is different than being able to say to your friend, yeah, absolutely, I'm here for you as much as I can be, but please don't call me after 10 o'clock.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And because helping has bounds too.
It does.
And that's okay. And it needs to, because it also will give the person who may be struggling the opportunity to have that friend as a support with healthy boundaries. But those boundaries may also help the person who is going through some things to reach out to other supports too. So that, you know, a lifeline is great. It really is. If you use the old sort of, person throws a person a rope to help them, of course, that's really helpful if there's nothing. But imagine how much more supportive it would be if there were a web of support, a net of support, if you will. And those can be built as long as people have the opportunity to connect to as many supports that might be helpful as possible. And then it's not all on one person, right?
Yeah.
It is crucial to acknowledge these challenges and work towards creating a more supportive environment for college students. So, John, what can colleges and universities do to promote mental health and prevent suicide?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think the most important thing that they can do is what you're doing, is to have conversations, create space where not just that the conversations can happen, but to author them, to have the college be the voice that starts the conversation, and to be the place where that can happen. You know, we know that the stigma around suicidality, around help seeking, around mental health conditions or concerns is changing. But to a large extent, the reason that it's changing is because of open conversations like this, that people can know, not to use what's becoming maybe an overused cliche about that is, people need to know that it's okay not to be okay, but that the college knows that too. And that the college is taking steps to decrease the stigma around these things by having an open conversation and taking the leadership role in, I see this as reaching out. Sometimes the there's kind of this idea that, like, if somebody's going through something, it's all on them to reach out and sort it out. I really appreciate opportunities like this that I think are a demonstration of the college reaching back. Reaching the college the service is reaching out for the people as much as the people might be reaching for the service. And I think that's, to me, that's a huge thing. And there is a big difference there between the way things used to be. It used to be that, well, if they don't want help, then there's nothing we can do. But how do we know that if the stigma is such a barrier for people to reach out? So to reach back, to have the conversation, to have, there was 2 recent public events at the college that were about engaging the student body in help seeking and having conversations about community resources and things like that. One of them earlier today, on the day of the taping. And, those kinds of leadership things are really important. The other thing, I think, is if we recognize, from the college's point of view, if we recognize that it's likely that there might be other students who become aware of someone struggling before the staff or faculty do, that we have a mechanism to support those folks in knowing it's also okay to reach out if you're concerned about someone, that you're not sort of, I don't like the terminology, but you're not sort of telling on them. You're not violating a confidence by saying that you're concerned about someone. In fact, you're demonstrating that I'm concerned enough about someone that I'm going to act to protect them when I don't think they can. Mm-hmm. And for the college to be prepared for that and to respond and to invite those disclosures from people who are concerned, I think is a really forward-thinking thing to do. And to recognize that I think that post-secondary institutions are in a very unique position in the sense that at once you are you're the place that kind of, quote, employs the students, right? Like their job is studenting while they're here. Yeah. So you are the place where they accomplish their work, but you are also in literal ways, you are their home. The campus is their home. And so I think to recognize that means that colleges need to do what you're doing. And that is to recognize that, we want to be here for the whole student. And that means academics. It means pro-social interactions as well, and fostering those and the culture of the institution as well, but also to invite conversations about struggle, about I'm hurting and I need support. Those, to me, that's the biggest things. And I think if I can add maybe one more is whenever the college has the opportunity, I know it's true for Lethbridge College, that they are participants in the community, the larger Lethbridge and Southern Alberta community around help seeking and support and resources on different committees and things in the community. And that really helps too. Yeah. So that the institution doesn't become or doesn't remain really insular, and by extension, then the students aren't remaining isolated and insulated on campus too.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of colleges and universities. We used to see that they were mostly reactionary. So there's incidents that happen, college reacts and put supports in place at that point. Nowadays, I think it's great that we do see colleges and universities actually having those support systems in place for the students, and the leadership giving it a top-down okay for the rest of the college to put these programs into place and have those conversations. I think that's great, and I'm happy that we do it here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. And I think again, this is someone's home and someone's place of employment, really, for at least 2 years of their life. And my experience is through initiatives like this, the college doesn't take that lightly, and I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, and I think both of you know this, but the college has also taken an active role in supporting the employees, the faculty and staff at the college in suicide awareness, suicide prevention, but also having conversations about things like empathic strain or compassion fatigue and recognizing the cost on the carers too. Yeah. So that is also an important thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Corinne, since we work here at the college, do you have a list or a number of things that the college is actually doing here to support the topic of suicide or encourage the topic of suicide conversations, but other mental health supports? What programs are we offering here?
So we have within Wellness Services, we have a counseling team, and it is made up of counselors that are on site through the college full-time, and then we also have a couple of Alberta Health Services mental health therapists that can support students. We have support nurses like Steve in our office who also support students kind of on a drop-in basis with mental health. So that's like the Wellness Services piece. Also through our office, we have our health promotions coordinator who is working on a life promotion program, which is connected with students, so student representatives, looking at how we can build in hope for students, connection for students. Belonging, yes.
Hope, belonging, and...
But they are working on building programs and strategies to promote that connection with the college, to help prevent mental health conditions and that suicidal ideations in students. Also thinking like the LCSA, the Lethbridge or the College Student Association, they have so many social events where people can find those connections. You're new to Lethbridge or you're new to the college. How do you connect with other people? So there's lots of programs through there.
And this semester we just started a couple of groups.
Yes, yeah, we have 2 groups running. So we have our Recovery Roadmap.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, you bet.
So Recovery Roadmap, this is a drop-in group every Tuesday from 12 to 1. And there's no registration required. It's for anyone who is on an addictions journey. So at any point on that journey, whether you're in recovery or you're thinking about your use of substances, you can come to that group and meet other people, learn strategies. We also have our Mindful Meet, Nurturing Mental Health drop-in group, and it runs every other Monday from 11:30 to noon. And we talk about different mental health things as well as practical skills and strategies that can support students in managing mental health. What else?
Well,
I got one for you. How about that? I do know that the RAs, the residence assistants, so if you think of sort of the supports available for folks living on campus, I think that that's an important recognition too. And I know that we've had the opportunity to support those folks with some learning around suicide awareness and mental health awareness in the past. And I know that connection is still there too. And so we're looking at things in the coming year as well. But that's something important to remember, is that students can be there to help themselves too.
Yeah, we definitely put a lot of respect to our resident aides. We also do education. Mm-hmm. So we do, in our limited way, we have a very short 1-hour suicide intervention prevention course that we do. And this semester, Corinne actually is put together a 2-hour suicide information workshop.
Yeah, it's called Suicide Prevention 2.0.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there you go.
Right. Very exciting.
Yeah.
And if you're, that's the perfect segue that I just can't let that float by. But if you're connected to folks either in the campus staff and faculty community, or if you're connected to students who could benefit from suicide intervention training because of their learning track or something like that, give us a call. We can have a conversation about what we might be able to do to get them a certificate in that. We also have that community helpers program that I talked about. which happens in 30 different sites across the province now. And many of them, a number of them at least, in post-secondary environments, like the U of A has their own community helpers. And what they do is 2-day training to support, I'll use the word youth, and that applies to up to 30 years old. But it's a 2-day workshop on supporting youth in learning how to support the youth around them more effectively. So how to be a better listener, talking about mental health conditions, concerns, talking about understanding suicide, talking about things like self-care, understanding tipping point issues when somebody might be at a point where they're at risk of harming themselves and we need to act to protect them. And what does that look like? That is something that's available through Lethbridge Family Services as well. And it could be arranged on campus, I believe, and even independent of that, there will be versions of it that will be offered, sessions of it that will be offered through Lethbridge Family Services at our own building. And we're always open to collaborating and offering those things in a way that is supportive to student participation. So if getting 2 days in a row is not a practical thing, then let's do it a piece at a time. And we can do that even at class length for a time.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted hopefully to mention Lethbridge Family Services. Years ago I took suicide intervention prevention training from John. So all I've known is what John's taught me. And I think that's taken me a long ways in my role here. So I appreciate that for sure. And for our listeners, if you know somebody who is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out to mental health resources that are available either on your college campus, or if you're here, definitely the resources here.
Absolutely. And remember, there is hope and help available.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing your expertise with us today. Your insights are really valuable, and we hope that they inspire positive change on college campuses across Canada as this podcast goes out. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, just I want to express my gratitude to Lethbridge College and to you, Steve, and to you, Corinne, for the invitation to come and discuss this really important information. To let you know and to let the college community know that if there's anything you need from Lethbridge Family Services Outreach and Education, the wellness team here can connect with us and we can talk about what's available and what might work best.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And remember, share this episode with your friends and peers. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to explore in the future episodes, subscribe and reach out to us by email.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Fearless Journeys, Thriving in College. Remember that every small step counts to promoting life, hope, and well-being on our college campuses. Reach out to your peers, listen without judgment, and be the support someone might desperately need. Together, we can build a brighter future for all. So take that first step today. Music for today's podcast provided by Music Unlimited.